Okay, so today for 2.6, we're going to learn all about adaptations. And so let's go ahead and jump into these notes. All right, so fitness and adaptations. All populations have some genetic diversity. So every population. So if we look around our classroom in class or any of the classrooms in our school, we'll notice that there are adaptations in hair color, how tall someone is, body structure. You could hold up everyone's hand in the class and kind of measure how big those hands are, and you'll see a big difference in size, a range of sizes. So there's always some variability in the genomes of individuals. And so that's no different for humans versus plants versus animals versus bacteria, even. And genetic diversity exists because there are random mutations that occur. Mutations are not always a bad thing, but there's random mutations that occur while DNA is being copied to create those new traits. So let me get rid of my picture here for a second. Here's our original sequence of DNA, just to kind of bring back a little biology here. And then right here, you'll see this was supposed to be a thymine or a T nitrogenous base, but it ended up being a C or a cytosine. And so that is what something we call, that's basically what a mutation is. And there's a lot of different ways that we can get mutations, but that's just one example. Okay, so another thing that causes genetic diversity is the crossing over between chromosomes when parent chromosomes combine, and that creates new combinations of genes. And so genes are just expressed as traits that we can physically see. And so we can see the results of that crossing over even when you look at your brothers and sisters or your siblings or even your cousins, or maybe your parents compared to your aunts or uncles, you'll notice that crossing over happens. I don't look exactly like my brothers. There's some similarities, but because that crossing over happens randomly and as well, there's some random mutations, I would look different than my brothers. We're not all clones. Okay. All right, so an adaptation is a new trait that increases an organism's fitness. When we're talking about genetic fitness, we're talking about the ability to survive and to reproduce. Okay, so adaptations and natural selection. So just again, this is probably all recall from when you took biology, but just to kind of get us back all on the same page. Natural selection is when organisms that are better adapted, so they don't change in response to, but what they do is those that are best able to survive in a specific habitat or environment are able to survive. And because they're surviving, they're able to reproduce with other organisms that are surviving, and they're able to produce offspring. So individuals that do have any advantageous or beneficial adaptations will actually pass those on to their offspring, and those without those adaptations, and if the pressure is there to have that adaptation and you don't have it, then you don't survive, and those that do have it do survive. So those without those adaptations die off. And so what this leads to is that over time, the entire population will end up having that adaptation. That is what leads to evolution. We end up eventually, if there's enough adaptations, if there's enough differences between individuals, we'll end up actually creating a new species. And so that's how natural selection can turn into actually speciation or creating new species over time. So again, I think I already said something about pressure. There's a selective pressure or a force. This is an environmental condition that actually will kill off those organisms that do not have the traits or the adaptations that make it able to survive in a certain environment. So, for instance, let's take a look at this. We've got mice. We've got dark brown mice, and we have light brown mice. Let's just say we have black to keep it easy. So, black mice and brown mice. And so, if we look, let's say that we're in the volcanic islands of Hawaii. This is all volcanic rock, and it's black as well. And so, the mice that live there, the black mice, are not able to be seen by the birds. And so we see all of these brown mice are going to get eaten by these birds. We're left with just black mice. These black mice are going to survive, they're going to reproduce, they're going to have babies. And eventually, if we would even go out a couple more pictures here, a couple more generations, we could see that there'd be no brown mice and all black mice. So this is an example of how this selective pressure, the hawk flying around, eating off or picking off all those brown mice, are going to kill off those that are not black, and the ones that are black are able to survive because they're camouflaged. They reproduce, eventually the entire population would become black mice. So that's the advantageous trait. Okay, so predation again, hawk, and the trait being passed on is the black fur color. Okay, so environmental change. So what happens when an environment changes with evolution? The environment an animal lives in, an organism lives in, actually determines which traits are advantageous adaptations. So as environments change, different traits can become advantageous. And so those adaptations are advantages, and the old traits may become disadvantages. So, for instance, a drought can kill off finches that have smaller beaks, making larger beaks for cracking harder seeds and adaptation. So, you can see this here. It used to be that this was the randomness or the variation that occurred within the population. Everybody could survive. But now we have a drought, and all of the small seeds are no longer produced. So the only seeds that are produced now because of the drought are the large seeds. So these guys down here are not going to be surviving as well. So that old adaptation that was once advantageous is now a disadvantage to have a small beak. It's now better to have a larger beak, and we're going to end up with more birds having larger beaks over time, just like the mice from the last slide. Okay, so evolution, the pace of evolution. This is the more rapidly that an environment changes, the less likely that a species in the environment will be able to adapt, because this doesn't happen in just a couple of days. On the most part, most of the many organisms, it takes generations, and for humans generations are 20 to 30 years long. So it actually takes years and years for this to happen, and it usually doesn't even happen in one generation. It happens in multiple generations. So evolution's very slow. So as the environment rapidly changes faster and faster, many species are going to either migrate out and leave a specific area and go someplace else, or they'll eventually die off if they can't survive or migrate. If the ocean warms too quickly, many species of fish may not be able to migrate because before they actually run out of oxygen and they end up suffocating. So that's an issue. The more genetic diversity in a population, the better they are able to adapt to environmental change, because that means more genetic diversity means more variation of trait. And so we have more variations of traits. The odds are that that some of the individuals in the population will have a desirable trait that makes it able to survive. And then the longer the lifespan of the organism, like I said with humans, the slower the rate of evolution. So bacteria and viruses can adapt and evolve in just a couple of days. We can see that under the microscopes. Human evolution actually takes thousands to millions of years. So that's not something that's going to happen very quickly. Okay, so that is pretty much what you need to know about evolution, natural selection, and adaptation for apes. So just most of that's probably a quick review of what you learned in biology. So here's your practice FRQ for today for 2.6. It says this data table shows the beak size of 20 finches from two different islands, I'm sorry, in the Galapagos. Describe the difference in beak size between the two islands, and then make a claim about the reason for this difference in beak size. So in this one, you're evaluating data and then making a claim and providing evidence to support your claim. Okay, if you have, make sure you, just as a reminder, you can check your answer on OneNote for the FRQ. And if you have any questions about the notes, make sure you stop me in class. All right, see you all later.